Okay, I'm going to talk you through The Manhunt by Simon Armitage then. So this is a nice poem. I think it's one that students tend to enjoy. They quite like the messages in it and they seem to understand it quite well. I'm going to show you a few bits of analysis that will hopefully get you up to at least level 5, level 6 understanding as we go through. So the title's quite interesting, I think, with the manhunt. Okay, we don't actually kind of see a chase as such here, but it's about searching for that husband who the wife has seemingly lost. It's based on a real relationship. It's based on Eddie Beddoes, who you can see in the middle, and his wife Laura Beddoes, and there's a great YouTube documentary about them too. And Simon Armitage, who's one of the more famous poets in this country at the moment. He wrote this poem for documentary that was based on veterans of war, and I think Eddie Beddoes was about the Bosnian War in the 90s. Okay, so it's about a real relationship, but Simon Armitage himself did not fight in the war, but he's writing about Eddie Beddoes, who you see in the middle, who came back from war injured. Okay, so the speaker in the poem is the wife, Laura Beddoes, and it's called Laura's poem in the documentary. So if you pause the video and read this out loud, that would work. I think actually that your screen is just missing out the last line, which is every nerve in his body had tightened and closed. Then and only then did I come close. I've just changed it a bit now, so hopefully you can see that there now. So when we think about this poem, the overview of it, okay, at the start of the poem, it's the initial impact of her husband's injuries upon their relationship. So after the first phase, after passionate nights and intimate days, we can see the injuries take their toll on their marriage, as we see. In the middle of the poem, the speaker traces each injury. There's some really nice verbs going through, all right, like explore and handle and hold and attend and all these things. So the wife here, the Laura Beddoes, she's tracing. The speaker's tracing each injury on the body and trying to discover this husband who's returned to her. The end of the poem is that clear link to PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, which has been experienced by a soldier, and the mental and emotional impact of war there too. Okay, the sweating, unexploded mine is a great quotation to remember there. All right, and this idea that only then did I come close. So only then did she find the man that she was in love with, perhaps. The perspective, as I said, is first-person poem. Okay, so we see all the way through, would he let me trace and handle and hold and all these bits, I widen the search. And that makes it much more personal. It's the wife's experience or it's the speaker's experience of her husband's injuries. And I think the key message here is that war impacts loved ones too. Soldiers can't escape the horror of war and it affects people physically and mentally. And it's not just the soldiers in this part that are affected, but the partners and the family members of it as well. So the context here is a little bit trickier than the poem like Dulce because, like I say, Simon Armitage did not fight in the war at any point. So it could be known as Laura's poem. It's written that Channel 4 documentary, Forgotten Heroes, and it examined the lives of soldiers and their families. All right, so Simon Armitage wrote this poem in about 2007, and he wrote it for this documentary series to be read by Laura, the wife of Eddie Beddoes, who had served in Bosnia and who was discharged due to injury and depression. You can easily find Laura Beddoes reading this poem out, and it's interesting that Simon Armitage chose to write from the perspective of the wife, who did not go to war, and her experiences of her husband upon his return. So I think that's the interesting context there. It's a much more modern poem. Okay, it's dealing with the emotional trauma experienced by a soldier, and I think some of the older ones, like The Soldier and Dulce, as said before, they don't necessarily look at the injuries in the same way as what Simon Armitage does. So that's interesting. So the quotes in red are the bits that I would pick out. That's not to say that these are the best parts of it, but these are the bits that I like. So I like to start because I think the first phase, after passionate nights and intimate days, we get the sense that time's passed. This sense that it's not been a quick healing job. All right, and actually it's only then would he let me trace. All right, so it takes time for the husband to almost trust the wife again. Okay, even though the wife had nothing to do with him going to war and it's the injuries sustained there. I think passionate and intimate are interesting adjectives to describe those as well. We can see that the emotional turmoil, the emotional impact, but she's devoted and she's committed and dedicated with that. I like the use of let me, and so let me trace and let me explore. Again, it's this sense of rebuilding the trust and rebuilding that relationship, rebuilding that bond. All right, finding that companionship they had before. And I think that the verbs like trace and explore are quite delicate ones. And the power is in the man here. The power is with the soldier who's been affected by war and hurt in war physically here. There's loads of imagery you could use with all the different injuries there. It's also interesting that it goes, only then would he let me trace. So that's about her and her actions, contrasting with the frozen river which ran through his face looking at the injury. So it almost goes, one line is her speaking, and then the other is a description of the injury. And I think there's an interesting idea about structure there. I like the idea of climb the rungs of his broken ribs, this sense of a journey through it as well. All right, and the rungs being the ladder here, and perhaps that ladder is getting to that final point where the bond has been rebuilt with that. And there's lots more stuff you could do with that whole bit. The final bit of the poems, you've got to explore it because I think it's probably one of the most impactful pieces. So the sweating, unexploded mine is a great metaphor, buried deep in his mind. So we get something that is experienced in war with that mine, with something explosive there. But rather than the metaphor of it buried deep in his mind, that's about the post-traumatic stress disorder here, with that emotional struggle that he's going through. The unexploded is this sense of danger approaching or danger coming, right? It could explode at any point, at any time. And we see the sweating's interesting, with almost the panic there, experience it. And that's when she finds the source of this pain. Okay, so despite the physical injuries, the deeper pain is the one that's in the mind, and it's very deep. And it's only through the commitment and through the service that she finds it. I think it's as well interesting, then and only then did I come close, and that final line of the poem. Okay, so she doesn't find it yet, but she comes close. It's ambiguous though. We don't quite know what she comes close to. But it's interesting, the poem's called The Manhunt. It's a search for something here. All right, but every nerve in his body are tightened and closed. We see that the soldier's not willing, the husband's not willing almost to allow this to happen, and it's about the trust rebuilt throughout. Yeah, so I think those bits are the bits I would focus on. Good comparisons could be these ones. So I think it links with A Wife in London. Very different poem, very different war, so written about 110 years apart. But Thomas Hardy's poem focuses on a woman who's lost her partner due to war. Clearly with Manhunt, because obviously, while she's not lost her partner physically, she seems to have lost 2 years emotionally at least with that. So there's a clear link there, but it's also about the effect war has on a partner. So on somebody at home, and how the consequences aren't just felt by that person who goes to war, but they're much more widely felt, much more universal there. And I think Dulce is a great poem to contrast with it. Different wars, obviously, Dulce being a World War I poem, but both view the physical and mental damage that war causes. Dulce focuses on widespread impact of war, whereas Manhunt focuses on the close personal impact. And we see that personal nature of it all the way through. The only other thing that I'll suggest to you, if you have the time, either do the 20-minute task on the Eduqas exam board, which is a question like this. So the Manhunt's a poem about the impact of war, could be how it's worded. How does Simon Armitage present the impact of war in the poem? Remember to refer to context of the poem in your answer. So start at the start of the poem, something from the middle, something from the end, trace it as you go through. Or a comparison would be to pick a second poem of your choice, and I'd probably suggest one of those two. Okay, so if you were to do one of those writing tasks, that would be a good idea as preparation for your mocks. But no, that's my general analysis of it. Hopefully that's helpful in some way. Thank you very much.